Arsenій Yacenyuk in Ukraine. Welcome to HARDtalk.
Hello, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you on the show. We all see, Mr. Yacenyuk, that the cost of this war to Ukraine is already terribly high. Is it sustainable?
We are fighting for our freedom. We are fighting for our liberties. We are fighting for our homeland. And what is happening right now in Ukraine is a tragedy. It is a drama on the one hand. On the other hand, this is an unbelievable courage of Ukrainian military, men and women in the uniform, and the very strong unity of Ukrainian nation and of Ukrainian people. So we will prevail and we will survive.
But I come back to the practical reality, which is day after day, your country's capacity is being degraded. Your towns and cities are being bombarded. The civilian casualty toll is mounting. Your military is being sorely stretched. So it comes back to how sustainable is this for Ukraine?
A killer and Nazi-style President Putin, he actually anticipated to take over Ukraine in a few days. And look at the expert community and some military even officials who expected that Ukraine is to lose its grip over Ukrainian military in a few days. But it didn't happen. Putin miscalculated. Look how Ukrainian military courageous and capable. So it's actually 11th day of a very strong fight with one of the biggest armies in the world, which is the Russian one.
Right, but what if you right now had to look in the eye the civilian population who are cowering in basements, if they are lucky, in Mariupol, who have no access to food, have no water, no electricity, have been living like that for days, and are on the very edge? What do you say to them? What do you say to the people from Irpin who were bombarded as they tried to escape from their community yesterday, and some of them, including one family of 4, lost their lives? What do you say to your own people who are on the very edge right now?
My fellow Ukrainians, we are under attack. Putin wants to kill us. He wants to eliminate Ukraine as a country and to eliminate Ukrainians as a nation. We have to survive. We will withstand. Let's help each other. I strongly believe that this is the righteous war. And in this war, Ukraine will win. We are fighting for the future of our families, for the future of our kids. We are fighting for our homeland. There is no other way rather than to fight like hell.
But you know, Mr. Yacenyuk, plenty about Russian military strategy. You know what happened in Aleppo when the Russians, alongside the Syrians, bombarded and almost leveled a huge chunk of that Syrian city. You know exactly what the Russians did to Grozny. And you know what the Russians are doing right now to Mariupol and may, in the coming days, try to do to Kiev as well. Can you withstand that?
What Russians are doing is they committed crimes against humanity. And that's not just all Russians, that's particularly Putin, his military, and those who support Putin. I want to be very clear about this. This is the crimes against humanity. And Putin is a war criminal. As he is losing the ground in Ukraine, absolutely he wants to apply the same tactics as he did in Grozny and in Aleppo, as you already mentioned. So the only answer we have is a strong resilience and unity of the Western world and Ukraine, shipment and delivery of lethal weapon to Ukraine, no-fly zone if it's possible, supply of fighter jets to Ukraine, and ramp up sanctions against Russia every single day. Russian people have to feel the pain. Russian economy have to be undermined. Russian military have to be cut off of economic and financial and energy supply.
We'll get to what you want from the Western world, from NATO, the US and its allies in a moment. But just to stick with the situation in your country, just a few days ago, we saw Russian forces fire upon the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They now control that plant, and the latest information I have is that they are, in essence, telling the Ukrainian staff what to do. We know they also have forces close to other nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Isn't the truth that the infrastructure, the absolute spine of the infrastructure of your country, is now under threat? And while you talk to me of defiance, you talk to me of resilience and how the Ukrainian people must stand up to this, there will come a point, will there not, when they can't stand up to this?
There is no other option for us, Stephen. I want to reiterate once again. The option to surrender is not the option for the Ukrainian people. We have whether victory or death. That's what's at stake right now. This is an existential issue for the Ukrainian nation. So going back to the issue you raised with the nuclear power plants, you know that Russia posed the threat not only to Ukraine, and I believe that the Western world already realized this, that all this appeasement policy for the last 2 decades lead us to nowhere. Right now, there is another threat, which is a nuclear threat. On the one hand, Nazi-style President Putin already posed a threat, saying that he is ready to launch a nuclear strike. He didn't say bluntly this, but that's what he actually meant. But on the other hand, they started to attack nuclear power plants in Ukraine, which is another disaster that could just be a terrible thing for the entire world and for Europe. As of now, we all, once again, have to press on Putin and fight.
I hear your anger and I hear your defiance, but I also see what's happening on the ground. And I know that there are, for example, ongoing contacts with the Russians to try, after days of failing, to try to sort out this issue of humanitarian corridors, not least out of Mariupol, where more than 200,000 people are suffering the most terrible situation as we speak today. Given everything you've just said about Vladimir Putin and his Russian forces, do you think it is possible to strike a deal on humanitarian corridors which will actually work?
Putin is a killer and Putin is a liar. I don't believe that Putin is eager to provide any kind of real humanitarian support for the Ukrainian people, because he waged the war against Ukraine. He's killing innocent Ukrainians. And look, we had already 2, and the sad round is ongoing right now of these so-called talks. And as far as I understand, this is no more than a smoke screen or for the alibi talks. They offered so-called humanitarian corridors, you know where leading to? With the route to Belarus and to Russia. So Putin's idea, he's so cynical, this is the cynical killer, is to grab more hostages using these so-called humanitarian routes or humanitarian corridors.
Okay, so do you think then that the government of President Zelensky, and of course you're no longer part of the government, you were Prime Minister back in the period 2014 to 2016, but do you think Zelensky is making a mistake conducting these negotiations on the Belarusian border with Russian officials about a possible ceasefire, and also, as we understand it now, being prepared to send his foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, to Turkey to talk to Foreign Minister Lavrov this coming Thursday? Do you think those sorts of contacts, that sort of dialogue, is a mistake?
I don't think so. I don't think that's a mistake. And here is the thing. The decision to send a delegation to Belarus or to Turkey is reasonable because it shows that Ukraine is acting in a good faith. Whether Russia wants to have a diplomatic solution, no. Let me remind you that we had a few years to get a real diplomatic solution. We had a very big room for these kind of diplomatic talks. But Russia was not interested in any kind of diplomacy. Russia is interested in atrocities and killings.
Well, that's not what Moscow says. And if I look at the reporting from, for example, the news website Bellingcat, the investigative journalism website, they say that they have information about exactly what the Russians are putting on the table. The Russians are saying, it seems, and Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for Putin, has pretty much confirmed this, that if Ukraine is prepared to recognize Russian sovereignty over Crimea, if Ukraine is prepared to recognize the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, if Ukraine is prepared to say it will no longer pursue the ambition of joining NATO, then Russia will make peace right now. What is your response to those proposals?
Let me go back to whether Russia's saying truth or no. You remember when Putin said that these green men who illegally annexed Crimea and invaded Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk, they are not Russian military? And then in a few months, he acknowledged that he personally ordered an illegal annexation of Crimea. You remember a few months ago when Putin and his cronies said that they will never invade Ukraine, but they invaded Ukraine. So he's a pathological liar and all his cronies. In terms of so-called talks, here is the thing, Stephen. There is a very clear-cut playbook. How can we hold any kind of talks? The key precondition for any kind of real talks, not manipulated talks, is that Russia have to withdraw its troops to stop this war that Russia waged against Ukraine. And then we can have a talks between the West and Russia. This is completely different than Russia offers today.
Let's talk about the West now. You've already mentioned the West's response. Volodymyr Zelensky, your president, said the other day when he, I think, realized that there's no prospect of getting the no-fly zone enforced by NATO that he wanted to see. He said, starting from now, everyone who dies in my country, in Ukraine, will die because of you. And he meant you, NATO, because of your weakness, because of your disunity. Do you think that deep, profound criticism of NATO was helpful or realistic?
Well, Zelensky, as the president, he is in a very complicated situation. So he took the oath of the office, and he's doing his utmost to defend the country. But in terms of NATO and the Western allies, this is unprecedented unity that we haven't seen for decades in the free world. So what Putin didn't expect, he didn't expect that there will be no daylight between the US and the EU, no daylight among every single member of NATO, that NATO and the EU and the US will be ready to impose severe, tough, and stiff sanctions against Russia, that the US and our Western partners decided to deliver lethal weapon on a fast track, on a very large scale. So I really commend the efforts of the free world in supporting Ukraine and in defending Ukraine. More needs to be done, and I want to be very clear about this. Once again, what is needed right now at this particular juncture? We need fighter jets, we need surface-to-air missiles, we need anti-aircraft missiles, we need additional defensive weapons, and we need stronger and tougher sanctions, including embargo on energy sale of Russia.
Right. Well, but that's a very important point. You do not have that yet, and you may not get it. There's some discussion about organizing a Western embargo on Russian oil imports to the West, but nobody for the moment is talking about gas, partly because Europe is so heavily dependent on Russian gas. And if that doesn't happen, and if Russia continues to sell its fossil fuels in Europe and beyond, what does that say about Europe's willingness to accept pain in its efforts to change Russia's policy?
Let me remind you that 10 days ago, a lot of folks were very, skeptical whether there will be a chance to cut off SWIFT from the Russian banks, where there will be a chance to frozen the assets of the Russian central bank. But it happened. It happened. So in terms of the energy, we do understand the heavy dependence of EU member states on the Russian gas. But I do understand that it's much easier to fix the energy and the economy rather than to have the world which collapsed, the world which actually controlled by dictators and authoritarian regime, the world that cannot protect innocent civilians. This is the bedrock of the European Union. This is the bedrock of the free world. We can fix economy. We can print money. We can fix the energy. But first, we need to save the lives of ordinary Ukrainians. And this needs to be done. And this is my appeal to the free world. This is my appeal.
I don't know where you're speaking from, Mr. Yacenyuk, and I understand that you don't want to tell me beyond, of course, telling me. In Ukraine, sir. You're in Ukraine, and we know that Volodymyr Zelensky, in recent days at least, has been in Kiev, and he seems determined to stay in your capital. We also understand that there have been several attempts to assassinate him. If Zelensky is no longer able to lead your country, your government, how big of a problem is that for Ukraine? In other words, how dependent have you become on the leadership, the symbolism of Zelensky leading the defiance of Ukraine?
I don't want to have even deliberations over this issue.
But the Americans have told you you need, as a country, to have a clear succession plan. Antony Blinken told your officials in your government that just the other day. And surely it is incumbent upon you as a senior political voice in Ukraine to think about how the resistance, as you put it, continues, come what may, in Kiev.
I strongly believe that Zelensky will survive, that we have enough capabilities to defend him, and there is a clear-cut constitutional line of succession. Just to answer the question directly you asked me.
You mean Speaker Stefanchuk will take over in the event there is a problem with Mr. Zelensky and his ability to continue?
I believe that Commander-in-Chief Zelensky will be alive, period.
And in terms of what your government should do if, and we've discussed it already, if the Russians pursue a siege policy on Kiev, and you've already alluded to Grozny, Aleppo, is there going to become a moment when it is incumbent on the leaders of your country to come up with another location, to move the government of resistance away from your capital city, perhaps to the west of your country where it seems less likely Russian forces will move in great numbers?
I'm not in the position to unfold some kind of classified information that I knew as a prime minister, but I can tell you for sure that there is a clear-cut contingency plan. And this contingency plan already executed.
What is your reading of Vladimir Putin? As a former prime minister, you've obviously had to think very carefully about Mr. Putin, about his strategy toward your country. Some claim that he's crazy, he's gone mad. Others claim that this is, from Putin's point of view, quite clear, quite rational. He has his own national security interest at stake, and he is determined to pursue it. What is your view of Mr. Putin right now?
I was closely watching Putin when he addressed his nation, and I watched this so-called National Security Council meeting when he made everyone accomplice in his crimes against humanity. You know, he is not the guy I met a decade ago. It's a completely different person. I believe that he is unhinged, on the one hand. On the other hand, Putin started to believe that he is a messiah, that he has a sacred mission. And this sacred mission is to restore the Soviet Union, to restore the Russian Empire, to get rid of West, to shift the geopolitical balance, that he has this sacred mission. And this is very, very dangerous. Now, whether he's completely crazy or insane, not sure, but he's definitely unhinged. And
you say that, and I just wonder if there's any self-reflection in you, reflection on maybe mistakes that Ukraine made in the run-up to 2014 and the Euromaidan uprising and also right afterwards. Do you think, in retrospect, maybe you were wrong, and you personally were in the forefront of this, in your determination to turn your country westward, to embrace NATO and the EU as fast as you could? Maybe you got that wrong.
We were, we are, and we will be completely right. Because this is the mission to save our country. We wanted to have independent Ukraine. We wanted to have freedoms and liberties for the Ukrainian people. We wanted to have Ukraine as a part of European Union and NATO. We wanted to have prosperous country with the happy people. And Putin decided to punish us. So he decided to kill Ukrainians for their aspirations just to be normal Western and smiling people. So we are doing everything right. We are fighting for our future and for our country.
You tell me you are fighting for your future and your country. I have to ask you just personally, we don't quite know where you are. We see you not in this, when I've met you before, the smart suit of a politician. Now life is very different. Are you going to fight? Are your family going to fight?
So I am obliged. I am in the third line of mobilization. So if the General Chief of Staff decides to mobilize, absolutely. This is my constitutional obligation. Right now, I am doing everything I can to help ordinary Ukrainians with the humanitarian support, purchasing ammunition, purchasing helmets, purchasing different stuff for Ukrainian military. So I am doing my job. I do everything to help Ukraine.
I think you used the phrase fight to the death before in this interview. I just wonder if you really mean that, and if you are talking about death in a personal sense, or perhaps contemplating the possibility of your country essentially being extinguished, eliminated.
I said death or victory for Ukraine, because he wants to eliminate Ukraine. He wants to destroy Ukraine. He is killing just innocent Ukrainians. So that's the reason why we will prevail, and victory is the only option for Ukraine and for the free world, because this is the victory of the free world. This is the victory of humanity, if Ukraine prevails.
Arsenій Yacenyuk, we have to end there. I thank you very much indeed for joining me from Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.